Coming up on this episode of DevelopSec, we discuss how you can use the news to learn lessons from it and also maybe avoid some of the hype. Tackling the challenge to integrate security into the development process? Looking for insights, answers, and practical solutions to avoid getting overwhelmed? Welcome to DevelopSec Live, where our focus is your success in securing and improving development processes. And here's your host, James Jardine.
Hey everyone. Today I want to talk a little bit about how we can use the news to help us better our application security, but at the same time also help us avoid falling into the trap sometimes that we see around the hype of some of the stories that come out. And so I'm going to use a couple examples of some recent stories or things that we've heard about in the news and talk about what we can learn from these stories and also how we can better analyze the story to determine what it is we need to be doing within our organizations to make sure that we're hopefully not the next story, because nobody wants to be that. We don't want to be the next story that's going to be out there because obviously that can be bad for reputation. We see all these different stories. We talk about e-fail, which just recently came out. If you haven't heard about that, we'll talk real briefly about that. Twitter was in the news not too long ago announcing that they found that they were storing passwords in a plain text fashion in log files. And then there was also some interesting stuff that came out regarding a story that some research had been done around the ability to send voice commands to things like the Google Home or the Alexa devices at a frequency that people can't hear, but that those can pick up and possibly go through. So I want to talk through a little bit about this, because a lot of times what happens is we get these news stories come out, people start spreading them like wildfire. We oftentimes don't have a lot of detail around what that story is. We just get something pretty vague about, hey, this has happened, or some news came out about this. And we all start just kind of jumping to conclusions, and we start saying, oh, this is going to be super bad. We need to do this right away. And then when you really actually start getting some of the details, you start realizing, maybe I don't have to do all that right away. Let me take a step back. Let me see what the story is about. And then I can figure out, how can I apply this information to my organization and to my role into what I actually do to help better it, versus passing all the judgment and just passing it around like wildfire. Let's actually try to figure out, how do we do this? And, I do this a lot on the DevelopSec blog, where I do the takeaways, where we find something where somebody had been breached, and rather than sit there and destroy somebody and talk down about how, hey, they fell victim to a breach and they missed something. Yes, we all miss something. But if we can learn from that rather than just tearing everybody down, that's going to make our lives a lot better, and hopefully, honestly, improve our attitude. I mean, I got to say, I get a little bit negative when I start reading the comments that are out there about all these different breaches that occur, and, the outside entities that share opinions that, quite honestly, don't help progress us as we talk about security, and instead they actually kind of slow us down a little bit, because we're not actually looking at how can we help resolve this. Instead, we're looking at how wrong were we, or was that organization and how they messed up, and how this is unacceptable, and all these different things. Let's avoid that stuff. Let's look at how we can actually use the news and talk about this. So rather than having a separate news segment, I thought I'd actually just go through and talk a little bit about some of these stories and think about some of the things that we could think about with these. So the first thing, and this was a hot topic just recently, was e-fail. Interesting about this, we see a lot in the security industry where we're starting to create branding around vulnerabilities that we find within applications or within protocols. Doesn't matter what it is. We build a lot of hype around releasing this information. Like, wow, we've just found the greatest thing. We're going to release it on Tuesday at 9 a.m. and it's going to be huge. And then a lot of times it actually gets released, and quite honestly, we're like, wow, there was all that build up for that. So we get a lot of hype over stuff that happens. And, I don't want to take away from what some of these researchers are doing as they go out and find this. And this is something that I might actually consider research. But People spend a lot of time going out. They wrote a paper describing their findings and how this all works. I don't want to discredit that. And that's not the point of talking about overhyping articles that come out or these different things that come out. It's not about discrediting what they've done, because to be honest, a lot of it is good work. And it takes a lot of skill to be able to do that type of work. So let's not discredit what that is. But at the same time, organizations need to be able to take the results of whatever it is that they're getting, and they need to be able to analyze that. And I say this all the time in application security. Don't just take your static analyzer results and throw them over into your bug finder, right? Don't just sit there and throw them over and say, hey, these all need to be fixed. Sometimes we have to analyze these results and figure out, hey, how do we best want to handle these so that way we're making progress. We're not just plugging holes within our system, because that's never going to get us very far. So let's talk about eFail for a second. eFail, is basically, and we'll put it at simple terms, is this potential ability to be able to decrypt email messages that have been encrypted using like SMIME or PGP. All right, so I don't know a lot of people that use this. I know I've used it with some clients to be able to send some stuff back and forth. So we encrypt the stuff, but not a lot of people use this, because unfortunately, even still today, it's not that easy to set up. So a lot of people may not be using this, but the idea is, hey, I want to create a message that, while maybe it's transmitted securely anyway, I want to actually encrypt it fully end to end. So even in my mailbox, if I disable that plugin that I've installed in my mail client to perform the encryption, if I disable that, then even I can't read those email messages because they're encrypted, and I need that to be able to decrypt them. So in this case, they came out, and the initial article was very vague, just saying, hey, we can unencrypt your encrypted email messages. This is super bad. This is critical. And there was recommendations to uninstall and stop using email encryption, which, it's interesting just the community's responses, lots of split ideas on this. But, I kind of liken that to the idea of, wait a minute, so you want me to stop using encryption because in a rare case, somebody may be able to decrypt my message. That's like saying stop using HTTPS because in this rare instance of a time, in this rare coffee shop in the corner of some obscure state, we can man in the middle and we can break that HTTPS. But every place else is fine. But you should stop using HTTPS. Not the best route to go here to just blanket responses here. This is what automated tools do. Right? Our automated tools, like our static analyzers, our dynamic analyzers, they blanket us and say, hey, this is a high risk, without any context to our organization. But what we need to do is we need to take that information, we need to put it in context with our application or our organization, and determine, is this a high risk? Is this a low risk? And same thing when we look at eFail. This may be a high risk in certain situations. Probably not in most, but it is a risk nonetheless, either way. But you have to decide internally, is this high, is this low? How does this really affect us within our organization? So the ability to unencrypt messages. We talk about the threat model or the attack vectors that are there. So how would somebody go about pulling this off? Well, the first requirement that we need here is that we need to have the ability to actually gain access to an encrypted message. So that's either in real time, sniffing the traffic somehow and being able to grab that encrypted message as it's being sent across to the other user, or it's gaining access to your mail store and getting into the mail store and grabbing that encrypted file, or even potentially gaining access to your computer to be able to gain that encrypted file as well. So it's not really that easy in most cases to be able to get a hold of these encrypted emails to begin with, to be able to even start the process of trying to decrypt these values and get them sent over, right? So that makes it pretty difficult. I mean, that's a pretty high hurdle to get over when we first start thinking about this. So the next step is then you have to do some wizardry. You can read the paper to see all the stuff they have to do, and you have to craft this HTML email to send it back to the sender or the recipient. So that way their email client will take it, decrypt it, and then they open up, this back channel to be able to send that plain text data back over to the attacker, which a lot of this requires having HTML enabled in your email. So if you don't have HTML enabled, or you don't allow loading of remote objects or resources, then this makes it much more difficult for this to actually happen. So there's lots of different hoops we have to jump through. And then, of course, it depends on what type of mail client you use. Are you using Outlook? Are you using Apple Mail? Do you use Thunderbird? There's all these different mail clients, and they all react differently to how they're going to go. So with all these hurdles in place, is it something that you should just stop using and say, oh, no more encrypted email, I'll just uninstall these tools and move on? Probably not. But again, we want to take this information. We want to analyze it. We want to actually determine, how do we use this stuff in our organization? How do we want to then take the next steps? How do we want to proceed to make sure that we're not going to fall victim to this? But remember that everything we do in our organization is about managing risk and understanding that, you know what, there are some risks we're going to accept. Doesn't matter what organization you're in. There are a lot of risks out there that end up getting accepted because the hurdle or that bar to exploit is so high that it's not worth the time and effort to fix it based on what we might potentially lose. So that's what we had going on with eFail, and that's kind of a high level of what it is, and a good story to start with, to think about, hey, how do we want to go in and analyze these situations within our organizations to make sure that we're not jumping off the deep end. I made the comment on Down the Security Rabbit Hole the other day when we were doing a podcast, saying that I'm almost to the point with security news where I want to wait a week before I even look at it. And if it's still being talked about in a week, okay, maybe I'll think about looking at it. But in most cases, we have so many people that just jump on the train. They start retweeting the stories out. This is going to be bad. Oh man, look, vulnerabilities in this, when we don't even have the details. So I encourage everybody, if you're reading these stories or you're getting this information, don't just take whatever a tweet says and say, oh, that's bad, we gotta do something. Take the time to actually read the source articles that are bringing this out, that actually have the details, and make decisions for yourself, because what might be bad for somebody may not be for somebody else. And as an organization, we've built up the hype machine. It's beneficial for us to hype stuff out. This is marketing for us. Okay, so getting our name out there, we found something. This is how we build names. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it, but this is just how it works. So there's lots of incentive to market this type of info, because the more hype, the more I see it, the better marketing for people out there trying to sell their businesses. So we have to keep that in mind when we're analyzing the news to look at this. Now, not all news, however, is hype news around there, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be hype. It just may be news that's actually going on. And so recently we had a message come out from Twitter saying that they found during an internal audit, I'm not sure how they really found it, that while they are storing passwords using bcrypt, which is the recommended methodology for using and storing passwords in a system, while they're storing it that way, there was some process along the way between when they received it and when they stored it. I don't know whether it was during the hashing algorithm or how they were doing it. They found that they were actually logging the password before it was fully hashed. So somewhere there was a log that had passwords in it. And, they recommended, hey, we have no indication of an actual breach. This is something we found internally. There's no signs that anybody has gained access to this. But as good measure, you might want to change your passwords. All right, so that's all right. We've got response coming out here, which is good. They're letting us know that something happened internally, and we should go ahead and potentially change our passwords, especially if you don't have two-factor authentication set up already, which I recommend setting up. But there's lots of things that we can learn from this. And, I see a lot of, maybe I just have the wrong people on Twitter. I see a lot of people, basically trying to destroy the company. People have to answer for this. And, all this blow up about this. And look, I don't know exactly what happened, but things happen. For those that have never been developers before, when we're developing, we test things. We may have to log things to be able to make sure things work. There's lots of reasons of why this could be happening. Of course, they're probably not going to ever share that with us, but there's reasons for it that it could happen. And I don't care what type of security program you have in place, this type of thing could slip through in any program. So before we, start sending lightning bolts down out of the sky to destroy them, really, instead of doing that, let's just talk about, hey, as an organization, how can we learn from this situation? So we look at, hey, they were logging passwords. Well, it's a good chance for us to go through and say, hey, let's review how we're doing authentication. How are we handling the passwords from when they get sent up to us all the way to when they get stored in the database, and then how do we handle those afterwards? I like using these as learning opportunities because so often we don't think about security as we're designing our systems originally. Or we've got systems that are really old that are sitting out there, so we haven't gone back and looked at this stuff. So here's our chance to go back, look at it, and say, hey, let's review our authentication. How are we passing this stuff through here? And make sure that we're not storing passwords in plain text anywhere, that we are using proper hashing algorithms. I would be willing to bet a lot of people, if they went back and did this process when we saw a story like this, now we don't have to do it every time, but if we went back and did this, you might realize that you're not even using a strong algorithm like bcrypt or pbkdf2, but maybe you're still on MD5 hashing, or I hope not. Maybe you're not salting. Maybe you're not keeping up with the latest standards. Is this something you want to address? So it's not even necessarily about just finding the fact that maybe you're storing passwords in plain text, which you're probably not, but the ability to go back and review this stuff so that way you're making sure that you're not going to be vulnerable, or at least if for some reason you do get breached, you can go back and say, hey, we reviewed this, we updated this, we're trying to make reasonable steps to take security to the next level and make sure that we're helping protect our users. The other thing they had is, we got to think there's response that comes out of this. So something happens, they found it, they have a lot of people probably they go through for the response of this to be able to say, hey, we need to talk to legal, we need to talk to marketing. How do I get this message out? What message do I want to relay to our end users and to the public about what happened? How much detail do we want to give? And then, of course, what steps do we want to take going forward with our users? Do we want to force a password reset for this? Or do we want to just recommend it and say, look, we don't think anything really happened. I don't think there's a lot of risk there, but we had this situation. You might want to do it. Most cases, if we know it's a real breach, then we'll see them actually force reset all the passwords, right, as that extra layer of protection. So you want to think about those things when you're getting ready to have to respond to an incident you may find, whether it's an external party or an internal party. If you decide that you want to share it, this is something that you're going to want to consider. Now, the last thing I kind of want to talk about, and this kind of to me falls a little bit more into the hype engine, and it also falls a little bit more into the personal side, rather than necessarily the business, although businesses have these devices as well. But I saw a story come out, and it was talking about some new research about how there was this ability to give voice commands to things like Google Home and the Alexa devices at an audible level that is unrecognizable by the human ear, but the device can pick it up, right? So we're using a frequency that's outside our hearing range, but the device is picking up that frequency to be able to execute these commands. So, of course, the article talks about how, well, it's possible that we could, embed in music these commands that nobody will hear. So as you're listening to your music, your device will do whatever. I don't know what they're going to tell it to do. Order stuff off of Walmart or order stuff off of Amazon, or, go visit some site. All these different things that we might be able to do. And, it comes out as this huge deal of, oh my gosh, you're in direct danger. Everybody better turn these things off right away because this unheard sound could cause a problem. But we have to take a step back and we have to think about that. I say this especially when we talk about personal devices. Devices like these, they don't just open up their own connections to the internet. All right, they're reaching out to servers and talking that way. It's not like it's a new hole in your firewall. I can't just scan your network and see that you've got a Google Home device sitting on there. If I'm external, right, I have to actually be on your network to try to scan to find that. Right, there's lots of kind of fail-safes or protections in line here that most of these devices, we don't see it as much anymore. The older devices used to, yes, you had to open up a port on your firewall for that device to be available. Now everything talks through these services. So it's not just exposed out there. So the remote issue is a little bit less. And then you have to look at, okay, well, what's my attack vector? If we're talking about a song or a TV show could have this hidden information in there, I have to imagine on legitimate TV shows, I know we've had the commercials where the guy in the commercial will say, okay, Google, and it'll give some command, right? And everybody's like, oh, my Google started acting up. It played Pandora because the guy on the commercial said play Pandora. I know we've had stuff like that, but those typically are not malicious things. We're not trying to go out and do something with that, because if it was, that company would sorely be mistaken of doing something like that, right? People would really revolt against that. And I would say the same thing about legit shows. I mean, am I going to sit there and watch NCIS, and during that, for some reason, they've embedded some secret thing or something I can't hear to make my device do something? I would stop watching that show, right? I mean, I would, if it came out, and we have a lot of people looking for this stuff, if it came out and I found out about it, I'd probably stop watching that show. I might even stop watching that channel. I don't know. I mean, I'm not that tied to TV, to be honest. But I'm not going to do that. But there's even less chance that how feasible is it that somebody's going to hack DirecTV, or they're going to hack these master TV shows so that when they actually get played over things like DirecTV or Xfinity or AT&T, whatever these things are, that they're going to have this hidden message inside of it. More than likely, we're talking about somebody that's close by that can play the sound that we can't hear to make your device do something. And me personally, I feel I probably have a better chance of, a friend coming over and just saying it out loud when I'm right there, tell the device to do something. How quick can I say, cancel, don't do it? More of that. Or somebody just standing outside and yelling it loud enough so my device can hear it when I'm not home. So we have to think about, what are the attack vectors? How is somebody going to take this information or this vulnerability, and how are they going to potentially exploit me with it? And what's my risk level to that? Will I stop using my Google Home? No. Would I stop using the Alexa devices if I had them? No, not for something like this. Now, if you had something where it was remote, that you could all of a sudden remote in and do something on my devices, well, maybe that would change my mind, but that again changes the exploitability. That changes the ease of use. Okay, that makes a big difference. I also keep all my devices on guest networks, so they're not on my main networks. That makes them even less susceptible to the fact of what you can do with it if you were to get onto it as far as my main machines. But as developers and organizations that build these devices, these are the stories that we can take and learn from, because we're looking at it as, okay, and this is how development works. We work on building a task. We have a task at hand. I want to solve it. So I need a device. I can talk to it and it'll do this. Well, maybe I didn't think about the idea that an inaudible sound would do this. Now, some of these devices have voice recognition. They have maybe protections built in that would help prevent this type of happening, but maybe they don't. And when a story like this comes out, this gives us an opportunity to go back and look at our devices, if we're the developers of these devices, and say, hey, wow, I didn't think about inaudible sounds being able to trigger this. Do we need to come back and we need to do an update to be able to stop inaudible sounds? Or do we look at it and say, you know what, the chance of this happening is so small, I'm not that concerned about inaudible sounds. I'm more concerned about focusing on these type of functionalities because the attack vector just isn't there for me. And that's an organizational decision that will, through transparency, become clear, because as people find this, people want answers to it. Hey, what are you doing to help protect us from this type of thing to make sure that I'm not being attacked within my own home or within my organization? So as you're thinking about what are we going to do, what are we not going to do, think about how much transparency you want around that device or around that decision that you want to share, so people have the trust in still using what you have without feeling like you're hiding something behind the scenes or anything like that. So, I think there's a lot of hype that happens a lot of time as we see the news. Like I said, we've built up incentives for really blowing this up. And this isn't just a security problem by any means at all. It is definitely, it's all over in media. Every story we read is devastating. It's, it's horrible, it's horrifying, all these big words that probably should never be used or rarely used in media, but we use them for everything. So everything is critical or horrible or devastating. And then you start reading the story because the headline said it, and you're like, well, that's not that bad. That wasn't, right? It's to draw you in. It's to get you to read that story. It's to build that hype to get the clicks. Yet it starts us off thinking, we're going into that story already saying with a mental attitude, this is horrible. This is bad. I can't believe this is happening. I'm getting enraged right now thinking about even just reading this story. And to be honest, I usually just get enraged because I read the story and I'm like, really? This wasn't horrible at all, right? So this isn't a security issue, but as we deal with security, we want to think about it. But I encourage everybody that as you're reading the news, as you're seeing people tweet stuff out there about different things, go out and actually spend a little bit of time looking into it a little bit more. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. It's not true. Some of it may be, but there's a lot of stuff that's very biased. We can take any number and bias it in either direction to make it look good. So we have to be able to start taking responsibility for what we're taking in ourselves and how we want to handle that. So the next time you see a news story out there that is the next sky is falling, take a breath, sit back, and take a little bit of time. Wait for it to evolve a little bit. Follow it as it's evolving. But I encourage you not to jump on all the wagons of the sky is really falling, and see for yourself. Check into it. Learn what they're talking about. Some of this stuff like eFail, where it gets real deep into cryptography, that's over my head for how deep they get into cryptography about it. But I don't need to get all that deep into the cryptography to understand what they're saying and be able to translate into hey, is this really a big problem for me or is it not? Right? I don't need to have those deep understanding details. I just need to know that high level of, hey, how does this work? And what's my real concern? And we're going to get a lot of people that do analysis on these things because, again, it's marketing. That's why I have eFail in here, right? I mean, we talk about it. I talk about it because we can learn from it. But it's another one of these buzzwords that's out there that's going to help draw people in. And we're going to get a lot of analysis. And we're going to get a lot of analysis from people that are experts and they know this stuff and they have good analysis. We're going to get a lot of analysis from people that don't know anything. And they're just voicing opinion and regurgitating what other people are saying that they believe is right. And that's where it becomes difficult. So just take that time to try to weed through it. Find the people that are good and experts in those areas to get some of the analysis if you can't do the analysis yourself. But dig in and learn what's going on. It's a learning opportunity and it's a capability for us to be able to actually realize what really affects us and what doesn't have as much effect on us in these situations. So I appreciate everybody tuning in and checking out this episode. If you've got questions or anything like that, you've got thoughts on the stories, thoughts on how to handle the news, because like I said, this is an important thing. Send me some info. You can check us out, DevelopSec.com. You can also follow the podcast at podcast.developsec.com or reach us at DevelopSec on Twitter. Happy to talk more about this. I like getting other people's opinions. And so please share them with me because the more we talk about it, the more we can actually flesh out the garbage and start getting to the truth and the meat of what's going on and really start understanding how that affects us. So thanks for tuning in.